But there were so many other plays where it felt like A'ja was bullying other players on the Fever. And I want you to watch this play here with Lexi Hall. She's standing her ground. She's trying to down screen and A'ja just chucks her to the ground. Now there was no whistle there and you can see ref number 16 right there. He's watching the whole thing happen. No whistle. They just kind of let it go.
Picture this. The clock's ticking, the crowd's roaring, and in the middle of the chaos, you see it. One of the league's biggest stars, the reigning MVP, squares up against a smaller defender. With two hands, she shoves her to the hardwood. The referee is standing just a few feet away. No whistle, no call. Play on. Freeze that moment in your mind. The MVP, towering over her opponent. The smaller player lying on the court, staring up in disbelief. The official's eyes locked on the play, yet the game rolls forward as if nothing happened. It's the kind of image that makes you question everything you thought you knew about fairness in sport. Now here's the twist. That same MVP would later sit at the post-game podium, straight-faced, and claim her team had been victims of a special whistle, insisting the refs had handed the other side a free win. Imagine hearing that after watching her send a defender flying to the floor with no foul called. That's not just frustrating, that's the kind of moment that makes fans, analysts, and even rival players raise an eyebrow. This is where the story gets messy in the best way, because that shove wasn't an isolated play, and the special whistle wasn't just a throwaway comment. It became the centerpiece of a heated narrative that the Indiana Fever didn't beat the defending champs on merit, but were gifted the win by biased officials. A single statistic, 34 free throws for Indiana versus just 11 for Las Vegas, was plastered everywhere, fueling conspiracy theories overnight. But here's the problem with headline numbers. They don't always tell the full truth. Stats can be spun, quotes can be clipped, and one viral soundbite can hide what really happened on the floor. And if you've been following this series closely, you know there's always a gap between the official story and what actually plays out between the lines. That gap is exactly where we're headed, because behind the soundbites, the memes, and the finger pointing, the tape tells a very different story, one the Aces probably hoped would stay buried. We're talking uncalled fouls, patterns of aggression, a sideline player's blunt social media post, and even a late-game coaching blunder that turned a tight playoff battle into a meltdown. If you think you already know what happened in Game 4, stay tuned. What you're about to hear may flip that narrative completely. The controversy didn't start on the court. It started under the bright lights of the post-game press conference. Those few tense minutes when emotions run hottest and microphones become weapons. The Aces had just lost a must-win Game 4. Their season was hanging by a thread. The dynasty's grip on the championship starting to slip. The numbers on the scoreboard weren't the only thing haunting them. The stat sheet showed a glaring, almost cartoonish difference. Indiana Fever, 34 free throw attempt. Las Vegas Aces, just 11. That single column on the box score became the spark. To a frustrated locker room, it didn't look like a strategy mismatch or the natural outcome of aggressive play inside the paint. It looked like favoritism, a gift from the officials to the underdog, something that could explain away the loss. Coach Becky Hammon didn't hide her disgust. She leaned into the microphone and dropped the line that would headline sports blogs that night. They shot 34 free throws and we shot 11. Tighter on both ends would have been nice. No breakdown of missed rotations, no analysis of turnovers. Just that number, 34 to 11. In that moment, she planted the seed of a narrative simple enough for any angry fan to latch onto. We didn't get outplayed, we got robbed. Moments later, the team's MVP doubled down. Standing at the same podium, she delivered the quote that would echo across social media. I guess she's got a special whistle. She wasn't talking about some abstract policy or officiating style. She was talking about her on-court rival, Aaliyah Boston, the rookie center who had just dominated the paint and drawn foul after foul. The sarcasm in that phrase was unmistakable. It implied Boston wasn't being rewarded for skill or hustle, but for favoritism. The effect was instant. Within hours, highlight clips of the free throw disparity were trending. Comment sections lit up with accusations of bias. Fans flooded timelines with claims of a rigged series. That phrase, special whistle, was all over Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok. It was catchy, easy to repeat, and framed the Fever's win as illegitimate. And that's the brilliance and the danger of a clean one-liner excuse. It takes a complex, physical playoff battle full of strategies, matchups, and gritty paintwork and reduces it to a single villain, the referees. It tells a disappointed fan base exactly what they want to hear, that the loss wasn't their team's fault. But there's a problem. When you slow down the tape and start dissecting every possession, the story that stat sheet tells, the one that looks like a smoking gun, starts to fall apart. The 34-11 split isn't evidence of a conspiracy. It's evidence of two completely different game plans colliding. One team attacked the rim relentlessly. The other settled for jumpers. That part never made the headlines. Instead, the phrase "special whistle" became the perfect smokescreen, blurring everything that really decided the game. And here's the kicker. While Vegas was fanning the flames of referee blame, the Fever's own star had a much simpler explanation for her 13 trips to the line. It wasn't favoritism, it was positioning, and she even had a name for the technique.
But we'll get to that in a moment. Because to really understand why the Aces' excuse crumbles, you have to see how Indiana engineered those fouls, possession after possession. If you only looked at the box score, you'd think the Fever had been handed those free throws like a gift. But basketball games aren't won on spreadsheets. They're won on the floor, possession by possession, in the paint where the real battles happen. Indiana didn't stumble into 34 free throw attempts. They built their entire game plan around forcing Vegas into uncomfortable spots. Every drive, every seal, every post-up was designed to do one thing: put the Aces defenders in a no-win situation. Either surrender an easy bucket or foul. The blueprint came straight from the heart of their offense, Aaliyah Boston. All series long, the rookie center had been a nightmare matchup. Too strong to be moved, too quick to be ignored. But in Game 4, she added something subtle that changed everything. Earlier seals. Now, if you're not deep into basketball jargon, that might sound like something you'd use on a leaky window. But in the paint, it's lethal. Here's how it works. Instead of waiting for a pass to arrive and then trying to muscle her defender closer to the rim, Boston worked before the ball ever got there. She fought for position early, planting herself so close to the basket that by the time the pass arrived, she was already in scoring range. That one adjustment flipped the matchup. The defender guarding her was suddenly trapped. Contest the shot and risk a foul, or give up a layup. Over and over, Boston's timing forced Vegas to choose the foul. That's not favoritism, that's physics. And Boston wasn't doing it alone. Indiana's guards were relentless. They didn't settle for long twos or fadeaway jumpers. They drove hard at the rim, absorbed contact, and kept the pressure on the whistle. Every time they got inside, Vegas had to collapse, often late, and often with a slap on the arm to save a bucket. That's why the foul count climbed so fast. Meanwhile, the Aces played like they trusted their outside shot to save them. They floated to mid-range jumpers, relying on their MVP to bail them out with finesse rather than bruises in the paint. That style can win games when shots fall, but it doesn't get you to the free throw line. So when the final buzzer sounded and the stat sheet showed 34-11, it wasn't a conspiracy. It was a reflection of two completely different approaches to playoff basketball. One willing to get hit, the other trying to stay comfortable. And Boston herself made that clear in her post-game comments. Asked how she'd drawn 13 trips to the stripe, she didn't mention the refs. She smiled and talked about those earlier seals, the small, invisible work done before the cameras ever noticed. It wasn't a complaint, it was strategy. That's what makes the Aces' special whistle story so fragile. The fouls weren't gifts, they were earned. The inevitable result of a team deciding to own the paint while the other tried to dance around it. But here's the part that really twists the knife. While the Aces were busy pointing fingers at the officiating, the tape was quietly building a different case against them, showing plays where they got away with fouls no one ever whistled. And that's where the hypocrisy starts to come into focus. Up to this point, the conversation had been dominated by the numbers:
34-11. But if you've ever watched playoff basketball, you know the box score can hide as much as it reveals. And in this case, what it hid was the most damning evidence of all. While the Aces were shouting about whistles, the tape quietly showed an entirely different picture. Their own physical play that went completely unchecked. Fever fans had been pointing it out since Game 1, that the Aces' defense looked less like a disciplined scheme and more like an arm wrestling match. The officials often let them play through it. And in Game 4, that double standard came into sharp focus. The clearest example is a single play that went viral online after the loss. Late in the second quarter, Indiana's Lexi Hall was setting a routine down screen, a basic off-ball move that happens hundreds of times a game. She planted her feet, bracing to give her teammate a clean lane. Out of nowhere, the league's MVP lowered her shoulders, extended both arms, and shoved Hall to the hardwood.
There was no mistaking it for incidental contact. This wasn't two players jostling for position. It was a deliberate, two-handed shove that sent a smaller player crashing to the floor. And here's the part that really fueled the outrage. The referee, ref number 16, was standing just a few feet away, eyes fixed on the play. No whistle, no foul. The game rolled on. Freeze frames of that moment exploded across Twitter and Instagram. Fans were replaying it in slow motion, circling the official in bright red, demanding to know how something so obvious could be ignored. And that clip didn't just spark a meme, it punctured the Aces' narrative. Because if the referees were supposedly favoring the Fever, how did their star player get away with something that blatant? But the shove on Hull was just the tip of the iceberg. When analysts went back through the footage, they found a pattern. Hand checks that lingered too long, elbows to box out smaller guards, bumps on drives that never drew a whistle. All of it painted the same picture. Las Vegas had been allowed to play in extremely physical style for most of the series. That's what makes the special whistle complaint so hollow. The free throw disparity in Game 4 wasn't proof the refs suddenly turned on the Aces. It was a correction after 3 games of swallowing the whistle on their physicality. The shove on Hall became the smoking gun, the play fans could point to and say, see, it's not that Indiana got special treatment, it's that Vegas finally stopped getting theirs. And that realization didn't just live in highlight clips or fan forums. Someone on the Fever's bench, a player forced to watch the chaos unfold from the sideline, had been seeing the same imbalance all series long. When Game 4 finally flipped the script, she couldn't stay silent. Her name was Sophie Cunningham, and with one blunt post online, she cut straight through the noise and cracked the Aces storyline wide open. Every heated playoff series eventually gets its whistle war. Fans argue, coaches complain, players hint at conspiracies. But every now and then, someone from the inside steps forward and slices through all the noise. Someone who isn't spinning for the cameras or protecting a brand. And that's exactly what happened the night Sophie Cunningham picked up her phone. For most of the season, Sophie had been more than just another guard in the Fever's rotation. She was the heartbeat of Indiana's backcourt, a spark plug defender, a hustler who thrived on physical play. But a devastating MCL tear sidelined her weeks before the playoffs. Instead of diving for loose balls and chasing shooters off the arc, she was stuck in street clothes on the bench, forced to watch her team fight without her. Imagine the frustration. Your teammates battling the defending champions, trading elbows in the paint, clawing for every rebound. And you can't help. You can't take the floor. You can't change the outcome. All you can do is watch, night after night, as your team feels the brunt of the Aces' physicality. Sophie had a front row seat to all of it, and unlike the fans in the stands, she could hear the trash talk, see the uncalled bumps, feel the pulse of the locker room. So when Game 4 finally ended, when the Aces started blaming the officials for the loss, Sophie's silence finally broke. She opened her phone, went straight to social media, and typed a line that was as blunt as it was revealing. And it's about damn time. I honestly thought the refs did a nice job today on both sides. No filters, no PR spin, just raw honesty from someone who had lived the series from the bench. Those 2 sentences carried more weight than a dozen press conference sound bites. Because this wasn't an angry fan or an outside analyst. It was a player who knew exactly how much punishment her teammates had been absorbing. The phrase, "about damn time," hit especially hard. It wasn't gloating about winning the whistle. It was relief, the feeling that for the first time in the entire matchup, the game had finally been called evenly. To her, it wasn't the refs favoring Indiana. It was the refs finally doing their job. And that one post cut right to the heart of the Aces' complaint. While Vegas painted themselves as victims of bias, Sophie's message suggested the opposite, that the Fever had been fighting uphill for 3 games and had finally gotten a fair shake. Her message didn't just poke holes in the special whistle story, it flipped the narrative entirely. Fans and analysts latched onto it instantly. Screenshots of her tweet started circulating alongside the clip of the uncalled shove on Lexi Hall. Together they told a story that was impossible to ignore. The Aces hadn't been robbed in Game 4. They had finally been refereed the same way the Fever had been all along. For a league MVP's complaint, nothing stings more than being contradicted by a peer, especially one who had no horse in the media fight. Sophie didn't speak like someone chasing headlines. She sounded like a competitor who had seen enough and decided to tell the truth. But the fallout didn't stop there. Because while Sophie's post was ripping the bandage off the officiating debate, the Aces were about to suffer one last self-inflicted wound that sealed their fate in Game 4. A mental slip that proved the pressure had finally cracked the defending champs. Championship teams are built to thrive under pressure. They live for those final tense minutes when every possession feels like it carries the weight of the whole season. The Las Vegas Aces had been there before. Back-to-back titles, dozens of clutch moments, a reputation for staying calm when the clock turned red.
But on that night, in Game 4, something felt different. The air in the arena was heavy. The Aces were already rattled by Indiana's relentless drives, by the roar of the Fever's crowd, by the officiating that no longer seemed to bend in their favor. Every possession in the fourth quarter felt like a test of their composure, and by the final 30 seconds, that composure was gone. The scoreboard showed the Fever clinging to a slim lead. Vegas still had a chance. A steal, a three-pointer, a lucky bounce, the sort of miracle swings that turn playoff legends. They had the ball, the MVP on the floor, and just enough time left to make one last push. Then the unthinkable happened. From the sideline, Coach Becky Hammon made a split-second decision, a call for a timeout to set up a final play. The problem? She didn't have one. The Aces had already burned their last timeout minutes earlier. In the chaos, that detail slipped through the cracks. The whistle blew, but not for a foul. It was a technical violation, an automatic free throw awarded to Indiana, plus possession of the ball. The Fever's bench erupted. The crowd roared. In one single breath, Vegas went from a desperate chance at a comeback to having the door slammed shut. For Hammon, a Hall of Fame player turned championship coach, the mistake was gut-wrenching. She'd been through every imaginable playoff scenario, but this one was as simple as it was devastating. An error born not of strategy, but of stress. It was the kind of lapse that doesn't happen to a locked-in team. It happens to a team already fraying at the edges. And that's why the moment mattered. It wasn't just about one technical foul. It was the final crack in the armor, the proof that the Aces weren't just outplayed physically, they'd been worn down mentally. Indiana's aggression in the paint, the balanced whistle, the relentless crowd pressure, all of it had chipped away at the champs' confidence until the weight finally toppled them. When the buzzer sounded, it wasn't only the Fever's victory to celebrate, it was a symbolic changing of the guard. For the first time in 2 seasons, the defending champions looked mortal, human, beaten not just on the scoreboard, but in their decision-making. And as cameras panned to the Aces bench, you could see it in their players' faces. Disbelief, frustration, and a realization that they hadn't been undone by conspiracy or luck. They'd been undone by their own unraveling. That final blunder sealed the story. The special whistle
wasn't the villain in Game 4. The real culprit was the pressure that broke a dynasty's composure at the worst possible moment. Every playoff run writes two stories. There's the one told on the floor, a mix of hustle, game plans, and sheer willpower. And then there's the one that takes shape the moment the cameras switch on and the microphones appear. The story teams tell the public to make sense of wins and losses. Sometimes those stories match. Most of the time, they don't. For the Las Vegas Aces, the story they wanted people to believe was simple. We didn't get beat, we got cheated. That version was clean, dramatic, easy to rally around. A single number, 34 free throws to 11, became the perfect headline. It let the defending champs sidestep the harder truth that they had been out-hustled in the paint, out-executed in crunch time, and ultimately out-composed. The Fever's version was far less glamorous, but far closer to reality. It wasn't about favoritism. It was about a game plan built for playoff basketball. Drive hard, seal early, attack the rim, take the hits, live at the line. To them, Game 4 didn't feel like a robbery. It felt like justice finally catching up to 3 games of swallowed whistles. That clash between narrative and reality is what makes this matchup so fascinating. The Aces had the pedigree, the superstar power, the reputation of a dynasty. The Fever had hunger, discipline, and a chip on their shoulder. When the old guard got punched in the mouth, they reached for an explanation that preserved their pride. That's human nature, but it also shows how dangerous a simple headline can be. Because once a phrase like special whistle hits the timeline, it stops being just a post-game quip. It becomes a rallying cry. It hardens into a belief that spreads faster than any box-out technique or defensive scheme. Fans stop talking about rotations and switches, they talk about conspiracies, and in the process, the real lessons about strategy, resilience, and mental toughness get lost. This is where Sophie Cunningham's tweet and that viral clip of the uncalled shove matters so much. They pierced the story the Aces was selling. They reminded everyone that video doesn't lie, that body language and positioning tell a more honest tale than stat sheets and sound bites. They revealed what often hides behind the press conference podium, that sometimes the loudest complaints about fairness come from the side that had been quietly benefiting all along. Looking back, the final minutes of Game 4 feel less like a bad luck loss for Vegas and more like a case study in momentum shifting. You could see it in their reactions, the frustration at every whistle, the tightening of shoulders after every Fever drive, the mounting disbelief after Becky Hammon's timeout mistake. The narrative that started as a shield against blame ended up highlighting the cracks that had been there all game. And that's the bigger picture. Playoff basketball is as much about handling the story as it is about handling the ball. The Fever stayed locked into the reality of the game plan. The Aces got tangled in the narrative. When the whistle evened out, the champs lost not just the lead, but also the plot. And that mental shift cost them more than any free throw disparity ever could. When the dust finally settled on Game 4, the numbers on the scoreboard told only part of the story. The box score screamed about free throws. The press conference gave us headlines about a special whistle. But the tape, the unfiltered evidence that doesn't care about reputations or excuses, told the truth. It showed a team that came prepared to live in the paint, that fought for position early, that absorbed contact, possession after possession, until the dam finally broke. It also showed a champion roster that had grown used to controlling the pace, and when the game stopped bending to their style, Their frustration boiled over into finger-pointing and ultimately that fatal late-game timeout. In the end, it wasn't the officials who exposed the aces. It was the fever. They exposed cracks in the champs' defense. They exposed the mental pressure points that no stat line can measure. And maybe most telling of all, they exposed how fragile even the best teams can look when they start believing their own excuses. Game 4 will be remembered less for a foul count and more for a shift in perception. The night a dynasty's composure cracked. The night a rookie center proved the value of fundamentals. And the night a sideline guard's single tweet cut through all the noise. So here's the question we'll leave you with. Was the special whistle ever real? Or was it just playoff mind games that backfired? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. If you live for breakdowns that go past the box score, for the strategy, the psychology, the raw behind-the-scenes truths, hit that like button and subscribe so we know you want more of these deep dives. Because in sports, as in life, the most powerful story is rarely the one told the loudest. It's the one hidden in plain sight.